Welcome to another episode of COVID Comms. My name is Clifford Morgan, and today we're talking the difference between military and civilian leaders in a crisis. I've had a question come through around whether or not I observe any differences between a military leader or a leader with military training versus a civilian leader when it comes to dealing with a crisis. Great question, and thank you for sending it through. The first observation that I would make is that just because someone has had military training does not mean that they are automatically going to be an effective leader during a crisis. Nor is it the case that if someone has been a civilian their entire life, that they are ill-equipped to lead well during a crisis. That being said, it's my observation that there are four key things that military leaders do when it comes to managing a crisis. The first thing is that they stop and assess the situation. I remember early on during my leadership training in the military, whenever I would encounter the enemy, my immediate reaction was to give the command for a full frontal assault on the enemy position. Now, what I had to learn was to stop and assess the battlefield. Consider where I am, where the enemy is, what the terrain is like, and what is the best way in order to defeat the enemy and also achieve the mission. What military training does is it forces a leader to detach from the situation and view the bigger picture, evaluate the broader context, and then decide what is the best way forward. And any good leader during a crisis, whether they are civilian or military, will do just that. The other thing that they do is that they don't just do it once, that they are constantly re-evaluating and reassessing as the situation changes. Another thing that military leaders do incredibly well is planning. No military leader will set foot on the battlefield without a clearly defined battle plan. They'll be able to tell you the strategy at a high level, how the mission's going to be achieved, and the tactics. And that is the specific actions that are going to be executed in order to achieve both the strategy and the mission. An example right now in the midst of COVID-19 is that many businesses, in order to survive, must pursue a strategy of cutting costs. And that forces them to make the tactical decision as to whether or not they reduce the number of staff they employ or they reduce the number of hours that staff work. Two different tactics to achieve the same strategy. One of the things about a crisis is that things are so dynamic and things are constantly changing. That means that at any given time, a specific plan may be rendered redundant. It is the discipline of planning and considering all the options, putting contingency plans in place that allows a military leader to be so responsive to the changes on a battlefield. The same principle applies in the civilian world and in today's current crisis. As General Dwight Eisenhower once said, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. Another thing that military training does is that it forces a leader to get very comfortable in making decisions without all the information that they need. One of my old flight commanders recently said the most important leadership skill that he took away from his time in the Air Force was the ability to make a decision with only 70% of the information he needed. On the battlefield, you are never going to have all the information that you need, nor do you have the time to get it. You need to be comfortable in making a decision with the information that you have at any given moment. And one of the things that allows a military leader to do this is the fact that they are constantly re-evaluating and reassessing the situation as it changes. So that if they figure out they've made the wrong decision, they can quickly correct as soon as possible. The final observation I'll make around military leaders, and probably the most prominent thing that distinguishes them from their civilian counterparts, is the amount of structure that they use when leading through a crisis and the mental models they apply when going through each of the other points we've already discussed. The military teaches leaders to use tried and tested models to conduct battlefield evaluations, to plan at various levels, and use decision-making frameworks that apply from whether you are a four-man team on the ground right through to a multinational joint task force operation. Civilian leaders can be highly effective in the midst of a crisis if they are able to assess the situation, to generate plans, and to make quick decisions. However, it is the structure that a leader with military training brings to each of these processes that sets them apart from their civilian counterparts and positions them really well to lead through a crisis. Because they can clearly articulate what the structure and process they apply is, they can be incredibly intentional about implementing it, particularly under pressure. This structure is so important that I want to spend the next couple of episodes sharing with you a couple of mental models that I learned while I was in the military and how I've applied them and used them with my civilian coaching clients to make them more effective in the marketplace whilst under pressure. So Leonard, I hope that answers your question. And if you've got a question about leadership and psychology during a crisis or during this season, please put it in the comments box below. I'd also love to hear what stood out to you the most in this little session, this episode. We've got more COVID comms coming up, so stay tuned. And as always, lead well.